In this final video for this week, we will continue our discussion of how the Pomare family consolidated and maintained their power throughout Raiatea, Tahiti, and the other islands within the Leeward and Windward groups before and during the period of European contact in the late 17 and early 1800s. In the previous video, we discussed how the Pomare family used traditional pre-Christian religions to their advantage, and now we'll look at how they adapted to new Christian religions. The first individual I'd like to speak about is Pomare I and his rise to power. He was a high-born chief or ari'i with strong links to the Raiatea nobility, as well as connections to the Arioi priesthood. Remember that priesthood that worshipped the god of war, Oro. We can see an image of him sketched by a European explorer around the time when he was a young man. Through family connections, he became influential in important villages, especially in the northwest of Tahiti. He was quick to see the potential of European presence, particularly their location at Matavai Bay. Europeans had begun arriving in Tahiti from 1797. This included explorers, traders, and missionaries, and Matavai Bay was a convenient location for many of them because it was one of the safest deep-water harbours in the archipelago. It was also located in a district that came under Pomare's influence. So Pomare was very keenly aware that the presence of these foreign powers, the wealth and the new knowledge that they were bringing, would be important in supporting his own power and influence in the island and also in the region. A number of explorers were the first to arrive, notably the English explorer Wallace, the French explorer Bougainville, and Captain Cook made a number of trips. A less well-known explorer is Captain Bligh, a British explorer who was tasked with collecting breadfruit in Tahiti as a potential food source to replant in other parts of the colonies. His story is famous or infamous for the mutiny on the Bounty, when his own sailors mutinied against him and set him adrift with some of his sailors on a raft, while they and their newly found Tahitian wives set off and found refuge in Pitcairn Island to the far east of Polynesia. This is arguably one of the most famous stories of Tahiti that was circulated around European and Western networks and continues to inspire European imaginations of the region. It's one of the few events in the Pacific which has been made into 3 Hollywood films, and it continues to encourage some dubious stereotypes about the sexual promiscuity of Polynesians and Tahitians in particular. But putting that aside, let's focus on Pomare I and his contribution. Although he died in 1803 before he was able to unify the islands, he certainly laid the groundwork, cementing his power in Matavai Bay, and then passing that on to his son Pomare II. Pomare II, in 1812, made the crucial decision to convert to Christianity. The LMS refers to the London Missionary Society, and they were one of the key mission groups who were active in the region at that time. As you will recall from our previous discussion, the London Missionary Society were influential in bringing literacy to the Pacific, and literacy was keenly adopted by leaders like Pomare II as a tool for acquiring further power. Pomare made friends with the London Missionary Society and sought their support, and was able to use that to defeat his enemies at the Battle of Feipi in 1815. He declared this victory as a victory for Christianity. The London Missionary Society were very happy that they had gained a powerful victory and champion of their mission, and they sought to use Pomare as a way to aid their conversion efforts in the rest of the group. They asked him to help enforce new laws which reinforced Christian values and which challenged some of the traditional religious beliefs and practices of the past. They prescribed or they legitimized Pomare's rule using Christian beliefs and morals, whom God has given as king to Tahiti and Moorea and to all surrounding islands, safety to all his loyal subjects in the name of the true God. You might think of other examples in parts of Polynesia where leaders, indigenous Pacific leaders, have used Christianity as a way to extend and legitimize their newfound power. And certainly Pomare II was crucial in doing this. Missionaries exerted great influence over Pomare. They succeeded in getting him to promulgate Tahiti's first code of civil laws, known as the Ture no Tahiti. It contained a mixture of both Tahitian custom and evangelical morality. The code consisted of 14 regulations which sought to remove the arbitrary power of chiefs, increase the power of the missionaries, and throw out some of the old customs which the missionaries regarded as obnoxious. In fact, the code was designed to give Pomare a constituted authority to rule in a manner more or less acceptable to the LMS missionaries, and to provide for an obedient, God-fearing, and Pomare-fearing population. Missionaries organized similar but separate code of laws in 1819 for Raiatea, Taha, and Bora Bora in 1820, also known as the Tamatoa Code, and Huahine in 1822. All these codes placed the governance of these islands in the hands of their leading ari'i, and they prescribed rules and punishments for crimes such as theft, desertion, adultery, murder, bigamy, rebellion, and sedition. One might wonder why Pomare, a strong, powerful indigenous Polynesian leader, would allow missionaries to write laws which undermine the power of chiefs and increase the power of missionaries. Remember, in pre-colonial Tahiti, there were a number of competing chiefdoms which would have threatened Pomare's power. So these laws, by undermining the power of chiefs, sought to remove Pomare's competition and reinforce his own power and status with the help of the missionaries. There are many more readings online that can provide some more details to this key period, particularly the work of Kerry Howe, an early Pacific historian who writes a fascinating account of the Pomare family, and you can also find some biographies online. So in summary, how did the Pomares maintain control? We can see, at least in this case, through the example of Pomare I and II, that there was some examples of war and fighting in order to overcome one's enemies, but it also relied upon maintaining a strong relationship between the priestly and warrior classes. Also, the Pomares had to be aware of the new European presence and influence, particularly that of new Christian missionaries, and so they maintained their power through manipulation of these new European forces. Old religion was not entirely thrown out, but it was slowly replaced by this new Christian religion, and the resources from overseas that it could use to influence to bring to bear on behalf of the Pomare family. So we see here a fascinating example of how religion, both old and new, was key to achieving and maintaining political power. In our tutorial, perhaps we can think of any other religious practices or pre-Christian beliefs or symbols in Polynesia and why they were important. A number of scholars, particularly indigenous Pacific scholars, are highly critical of Eurocentric assumptions that often misinterpreted religious practices and ascribed them to heathen or pagan ways. This was reinforced by Christian missionaries who denigrated or challenged traditional beliefs and religious spirituality, and there has since been a reawakening in recent years as leaders, as community members, have considered the important ways in which religious and pre-Christian spirituality served an important purpose in holding societies together, but also ensuring an equitable relationship with their environments. We might discuss a couple of these examples in our class. A European fascination with cannibalism means that there are an enormous amount of accounts which described cannibal practices in many parts of the Pacific. These cannibal practices were used to make assumptions that many Pacific Islanders, particularly Melanesians, were savage, cruel, untrustworthy, and inherently violent. Scientific theories appeared to legitimize this view by using dubious racial assumptions. Although cannibalism was practiced in some islands, the truth has been astoundingly distorted by European and other foreign representations over the years. Some literature explores this and explains how cannibalism was a form of consuming spiritual power, and so there is an inherent religious connection, pre-Christian religious beliefs, which supported or which legitimized these cannibal behaviors. This photograph here on the right, which was taken quite late in the early 1900s, is a staged photograph taken with some Fijian men. This is just to show you that although cannibalism was practiced, it was rarely documented by observers, and when it was often embellished or exaggerated for different purposes. And so we have to be very careful when looking at cannibalism. Another example which I find fascinating is the idea of mana. In Tokelau, Tokelau's atolls have been populated for about 1,000 years, but it wasn't until the 18th century that Tokelau came to exist. A series of wars at this time united these previously fiercely independent atolls. And this is according to a book published in 1991 called Matangi Tokelau. At the end of the wars, the atoll of Whakaofo had conquered Atafu and Nukunonu, bringing them under the rule of the god Tui Tokelau and creating the first united entity of Tokelau. I find this a fascinating story, and we've mentioned it before in the topic on war and peace. But it also shows how the physical power associated with the atoll of Whakaofo was legitimized or supported by religious beliefs around the deity, the Tui Tokelau, who was then used as a unifying force for the whole group. The Tui Tokelau was based in Whakaofo and was recognized as a god, and tributes to Whakaofo by other atolls like Atafu were intended for the Tui Tokelau. Other atolls like Nukunonu and Olahenga also acknowledged Whakaofo's control or rule, and in some cases resettled. So we see this fascinating religious and spiritual power supporting the physical political power held by a chiefly atoll. And that gives us a greater understanding of this idea of mana, or chiefly power. So with that, we'll conclude the video. Hopefully you've gotten a sense of how religion and priests serves an important role in facilitating the consolidation and maintenance of power by Indigenous Pacific chiefs. Thank you, and I look forward to discussing this further in the tutorial.